Every nation on Earth is drowning in numbers so huge they barely feel human anymore. America owes $38 trillion, Japan owes $9 trillion, and the entire planet is sitting on $315 trillion, 3 times the size of the global economy. But the part that should stop you cold isn't the size of the debt, it's the question no government, no economist, no politician can answer cleanly. If everyone owes money, then who is everyone actually indebted to? Follow that thread far enough, and the trail slips into something unsettling. The creditors disappear into a haze, the balance sheet loops in on itself, and suddenly the world isn't borrowing from some outside force at all. It's borrowing from itself. That's the paradox. A system that traps entire nations not because someone made a mistake, but because 4 men spread across 3 centuries, solving problems that seemed unrelated, built mechanisms that snapped together into a machine. A machine where governments borrow forever, interest flows upward without end. The principal is never repaid, and every crisis becomes fuel for the people positioned at the top. This isn't conspiracy. The meetings happened, the contracts survive. The architecture is written in public record, old enough and vast enough that most people simply stopped questioning it. And what began quietly in 1694 now holds every government on Earth in place, even yours. So step inside for a moment. Let me show you how the trap was engineered. Before 1694, debt was almost primitive in its simplicity. A king needed money, so he went to the richest men he could find: merchants, nobles, whoever had enough gold to gamble with a monarch's promises. They lent it. The king paid interest, and if he couldn't, he defaulted. Creditors swallowed the loss. The king found someone else, and the world reset. Debt was like a passing storm, disruptive, but temporary. Nothing in it was permanent. But in 1691, a restless Scottish merchant named William Paterson, a man who had failed more times than he succeeded, stepped into this chaos with an idea no one had dared articulate. England was locked in war with France. King William III was cornered. The treasury was bone dry. Taxes couldn't cover the cost of cannons, soldiers, or ships, and the wealthy, still remembering England's earlier defaults, refused to lend another shilling. Paterson approached the crisis with something colder, more mechanical. He offered the king one. £2 million, about $300 million today. Enough to keep the war alive, but the hook was hidden in the fine print. The principal would never have to be repaid. The government would only owe 8% interest every year, forever. No end date, no finish line, just an eternal drip of tax money flowing upward. The idea landed like a quiet detonation. For the first time, national debt wasn't something to extinguish. It became something the government could carry indefinitely. A permanent obligation, carved into the state itself. This wasn't a loan. It was a financial anchor designed to never lift. And the genius, almost sinister in hindsight, was how neatly it solved everyone's problems. The king got his war funding. The lenders got guaranteed income backed by Parliament itself. And ordinary citizens, though they didn't know it yet, became the fuel that kept the payments flowing. Year after year, generation after generation. This single shift cracked the old world open. Suddenly, debt wasn't a temporary burden. It was infrastructure. It was policy. It was the early blueprint of something far larger, a system where governments would borrow endlessly. Not because they failed, but because the design demanded they never stop. When Parliament approved Paterson's proposal in 1694, it did more than solve a wartime cash problem. It birthed an entirely new creature, the Bank of England, an institution built to manage a loan designed never to die. Wealthy merchants hauled their gold into the bank's vaults. The bank handed that gold to the government. The government, in return, funneled interest payments back through the bank using tax revenue collected from ordinary citizens. And those payments flowed forever, year after year, while the original £1.2 million sat untouched. The principal didn't shrink. It didn't budge. It simply became part of the landscape like a permanent shadow attached to the state. And it worked. It worked so well that within just a few decades, other European powers saw the brilliance in it and copied it. Permanent debt wasn't seen as dangerous anymore. It was seen as sophisticated, modern, almost elegant. It kept governments liquid. It kept wars funded. It kept influential creditors loyal. By 1790, even the young United States, still shaping its identity, embraced the same blueprint under Alexander Hamilton: debt that never had to be paid off, interest funded by taxpayers, and government bonds treated like currency. The model traveled from one capital to another like a piece of quiet code, rewriting the operating system of the Western world. What no one talks about is what this model truly did. It changed debt from a temporary burden into a permanent engine. It created a loop where the government's IOU could circulate as money itself. And the more the government borrowed, the more money the system could create. It was like discovering a pressure valve that not only released steam, but produced energy every time it opened. Patterson didn't live long enough to watch his invention take over the world. He died in 1719, not wealthy, not celebrated, barely recognized for the blueprint he left behind. But what he built didn't die with him. It grew, it replicated. It seeped into every major economy. By the early 1700s, Europe's financial landscape was no longer a series of isolated loans. It was becoming an interconnected grid of obligations backed by governments, traded by merchants, and funded by taxpayers who would spend the next 3 centuries paying interest on debts that were never meant to disappear. Patterson's idea had hardened into something larger, a structure with no natural endpoint, a system where borrowing wasn't a sign of weakness. It was the lifeblood. And once that idea took hold, the next stage of the trap was inevitable. When you line up the 4 architects across 3 centuries, the pattern stops looking like history and starts looking like engineering. Patterson turned government debt into something permanent in 1694, a loan that never had to be repaid. Rothschild took that idea in the early 1800s and pushed it across borders, weaving nations together with bonds that changed hands like merchandise. Morgan, in 1913, built the Federal Reserve so the government would never run out of buyers because the Fed could create money out of nothing and use it to purchase government bonds whenever demand ran thin. And Volcker, in 1982, locked the final piece into place when he made sure even countries that couldn't pay their debts would never be allowed to default. Instead, their debts would be restructured, refinanced, rolled over endlessly. Thread them together and you get a single machine. A system where debt isn't a burden, it's the core operating software running the entire global economy. Debt became money itself. Debt became the collateral that banks use to create more credit. Debt became the asset investors depend on for safety, income, and liquidity. It flows through the system like blood, constantly circulating, constantly expanding, impossible to drain without killing everything built on top of it. The hidden mechanism is simple, almost insultingly so once you see it. Governments borrow, then issue bonds. Those bonds get bought by institutions, banks, and central banks. The interest is paid by taxpayers, and the principal is rolled over forever. The IOUs become tradable, just like stocks or commodities. They're bought, sold, pledged, and leveraged. And because every major country uses the same blueprint, Japan with its 9 trillion, Europe with its 14 trillion, the United States with its 38 trillion, the debts interlock. Japan holds U bonds. Europe holds developing nation debt through the World Bank. The US holds European bonds through the IMF. Everyone owes everyone. Everyone holds everyone else's promises. It's a circle with no exit. A structure so large it's invisible unless you're looking straight at it. And because central banks can create money to buy government bonds, the demand for debt never truly runs out. That's the part that makes it unstoppable. The trap isn't that governments borrow too much. The trap is that the system only works if they never stop. And once you understand that, the world you live in starts to look very different. When you finally zoom in on the numbers, the first twist hits like a cold slap. The United States doesn't owe most of its $38 trillion to foreign rivals or shadowy outsiders. It owes the bulk of it to itself. Roughly $20 trillion is held by Americans' pension funds, mutual funds, big banks, insurance companies, even the Federal Reserve. Another $18 trillion is owed to government programs like the Social Security and Medicare trust funds. So when Social Security eventually needs to cash in those IOUs, the government has only 2 options: raise taxes or borrow even more. It's a perfect loop, taxpayers funding a system that circles right back and charges them again. And then comes the part almost no politician will ever admit out loud. Paying off the debt isn't just unlikely, it's impossible without blowing up the entire economy. Government debt is one of the primary ways money is created. When the government borrows, new dollars enter circulation. When the government pays off debt, those dollars vanish. If the U.S. wiped out its debt, 2/3 of the global money supply would evaporate. That's not a fiscal tightening, that's an extinction level event. Trade would grind to a halt, Markets would collapse in on themselves, a global depression would swallow everything, so the debt can never shrink, it has to grow, because the system is built on ever-expanding obligations. The third twist is quieter but no less brutal. Interest on UC2IS. Debt now runs at about $1 trillion per year, and that money doesn't drift into the ether, it's transferred from workers paying taxes to the institutions and investors holding bonds. A hidden tax routed through the machinery of debt, executed automatically, no debates, no votes, just a continuous siphon from labor to capital. And the most uncomfortable realization, the US isn't unique. The entire world is wired the same way. Japan owes $9 trillion, mostly to its own institutions and the Bank of Japan. Europe sits on $14 trillion. Held largely by European banks and the ECB, China's domestic debt rests inside state banks. And around the planet, governments hold each other's bonds like a vast circular handshake, Japan holding U equals S. Treasuries, Europe holding developing nation debt through the World Bank, the US holding European bonds through the IMF. Everyone owes everyone. Everyone is inside the same maze. And there is no door marked exit. Because leaving the system wouldn't just be difficult. It would detonate the entire structure the global economy stands on. In the modern world, the machine has new operators bigger, quieter, and far more embedded than any king, merchant, or banker from earlier centuries. Companies like BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, and Fidelity now sit at the top of the financial food chain, controlling tens of trillions in assets. They buy government bonds not with their own money, but with the accumulated savings of millions of ordinary people who will never see how the system actually works. These firms collect the interest on behalf of their clients, but interest is only the surface level reward. The real power sits underneath the control over voting rights in major corporations, the influence over liquidity flows, and the quiet grip they hold over the financial infrastructure that makes modern economies run. They don't govern countries, but they govern the channels through which money moves. In a world built on sovereign debt, whoever controls the flow of capital controls everything downstream. Look closely and the global economy starts to resemble one massive circulatory system. Government debt is the bloodstream pulsing through banks, central banks, pension funds, insurers, and asset managers. And interest isn't just a payment, it's gravity. It pools in predictable places, always upward, always toward the institutions that hold the IOUs governments can never retire. This is the part most people never see every crisis. No matter how terrifying, reinforces the machine instead of threatening it. A market panic drives investors towards safe government bonds. A geopolitical shock triggers central banks to buy more debt. A recession forces governments to borrow even greater sums. And every dollar borrowed becomes a new asset for the financial giants, a new stream of interest, a new layer of influence. Debt isn't a sign of a system breaking down. Debt is the system. It's the scaffolding that holds up pensions and retirement funds. It's the collateral banks use to expand credit. It's the safe harbor investors run to in every storm. It's the mechanism central banks rely on to keep money flowing. Strip the world of its debt and the entire structure collapses markets, banks, savings, trade, everything. Leave it in place, and the machine grows larger, more complex, more interconnected. And in that quiet expansion, the modern architects, these asset managers operating far above the political noise, gain something even more valuable than interest. They gain permanence because as long as the world borrows, they will always be at the center of the flow. Right now, we're not living in a random moment. We're standing at the exact point where 3 centuries of engineering finally locked together. The permanent debt logic born in 1694 never faded. It matured. The interconnected markets that Rothschild refined around 1815 didn't disappear. They expanded across continents. Morgan's blueprint from 1913, where central banks could summon money out of thin air to buy government bonds, became the global norm. And the restructuring doctrine Volcker cemented in 1982, the rule that countries must never default. Only refinance became the final cage around all of it. When you put these stages side by side, the shape becomes impossible to ignore. A structure built step by step, each layer solving one crisis while quietly tightening the system behind it. What started as a clever workaround for a broke English king has evolved into something so stable it can barely move. That's the paradox: stability so rigid it threatens to shatter if pushed too far. Every time a nation's finances wobble, The machine doesn't loosen, it constricts. New regulations appear, new institutions get involved, new programs, new loan facilities, new emergency mechanisms, each designed to stabilize, but each binding government a little deeper into the architecture created long before any of them existed. It's like watching an ancient building get reinforced after every earthquake, more beams, more concrete, more supports, until the structure becomes so heavy that it can never be altered again. And this is the part most people never see. Governments aren't steering this system. They're reacting to it. They enter office already bound by debts accumulated decades before they were born. They inherit obligations they cannot unwind, promises they cannot break, and interest payments they cannot stop. They aren't running the machine, they're managing its demands. For ordinary people, the illusion is that leaders are in control, that they craft budgets, set policy, and decide the financial future. But behind the speeches, behind the political theater, every government now operates inside a lattice of permanent debt. Global markets, central bank liquidity, and enforced non-default. A lattice built over 1694, 1815, 1913, 1982, layer by layer. The world you're living in today isn't the beginning of anything. It's the final stage of a system that has already completed its design. A system you don't escape by voting, protesting, or demanding change because the governments themselves can't escape it either. Patterson, Rothschild, Morgan, and Volcker lived in different eras, fought different battles, and answered to different masters. They never exchanged letters, never sat in the same room, never imagined their decisions would one day lock together. Yet when you place their solutions side by side, the alignment is so precise it feels less like coincidence and more like gears clicking into place inside a machine none of them fully understood. One made debt permanent. One made it global. One made it infinite. One made it inescapable. 4 moments across 4 centuries forming a single architecture. And the strangest part is this. The system doesn't even require malice. It doesn't need villains, secret meetings, or dark agendas. It only needs momentum maintenance. As long as governments keep borrowing, as long as interest keeps flowing upward, as long as people believe the machine is too big to question, the structure sustains itself. Every shock becomes fuel. Every crisis becomes reinforcement. Every bailout becomes another bolt tightening the frame. You don't see it because it's older than every institution you trust. You don't question it because every government you've ever lived under has depended on it. And you can't escape it because the moment a nation tries, the entire financial system begins to shake. That's the real prison, not the debt, but the belief that the system is natural, permanent, inevitable. So we end up in a world where $38 trillion in yuan does to us. Government debt isn't treated as an emergency, it's treated as operating cost. Where $315 trillion in global debt isn't a warning sign, it's the blueprint. Where debt isn't seen as a problem to solve, but the foundation modern power rests on. The mechanism that keeps money flowing, institutions alive, and economies upright. The architects are long gone. Patterson dead in 1719, Nathan Rothschild in 1836, Morgan in 1913, Volcker in 2019, but their designs outlived them. The machine runs on autopilot now, self-reinforcing, self-protecting, and every single person on Earth exists inside it, whether they know it or not. If something in this shifted the way you read the numbers drifting through the news, if the patterns feel clearer, heavier, more deliberate, then you're already further than most people ever step. Keep looking beneath the surface, keep pulling at the quiet threads, because the system won't teach you how it works, but I'm here to show you what it's built on and why it still holds the world in place.